right, we are now at 7:03. I do want to formally welcome everyone. Good evening. For those of you that are joining us for the first time, my name is Lutalo McGee, and I'm the project manager of the Housing and Wealth Committee at the Chicago Urban League and the president-elect of the Chicago Association of Realtors. I'm joined tonight by Ramona Brooks of our Appraisal Subcommittee, who will be monitoring the Q&A for your questions. I want to again thank the CEO and the president of the Chicago Urban League, Karen Freeman Wilson, and the vice president of Housing and Financial Empowerment Center, Pam Stalling, for establishing this committee to tackle the issues around housing and wealth generation and the impact of appraisals. And I want to thank those members of our committee that have dedicated their time the past year to show up to do this work on behalf of others. I also want to thank the Chicago Association of Realtors, the Dearborn Realtors Board, the National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals, Rainbow Push, the NAACP Southside, and Neighborhood Housing Services of Chicago for all coming together around such an important topic for real estate professionals, housing counselors, and consumers. As mentioned in our first two episodes, the primary focus of our committee is to address barriers to home ownership and wealth generation. Unfortunately, home ownership rates in minority communities still lag far behind other groups in this country. And given that we know that home ownership is the foundation of wealth, it follows that the wealth gap between communities remains huge, a gap that every day determines the life chances and quality of individuals and the collective health of communities. In that light, one of the issues we as a committee have focused on for the past year is the impact of low appraisals, including appraisal bias and or incompetence. From that work, we agreed that there were three areas of real estate practitioners, housing counselors, and consumers could focus on that will help ensure the integrity and reliability of appraisals. The first is how to prepare for an appraisal, which we discussed in the first episode of this series. The second is how to read and understand an appraisal, which we discussed in the second episode. And the third for tonight is how to prepare for a reconsideration of value. Before we begin, I do want to stress we will intentionally stay on tonight's topic, preparing for a reconsideration of value, and only address questions related to that topic. You will be allowed to submit your questions in the Q&A, and we welcome them. All right, with that being said, let's jump right in. Tonight, we have senior appraiser Tom Schurer that will walk us through the steps to contest or an appeal an appraisal when we determine something is wrong with the appraisal report we receive. Tom is both a respected member of our Housing and Wealth Committee here at the Chicago Urban League and the principal of Real Valuation Services. He has been actively involved in the appraisal industry since 1996, accumulating a wealth of experience across various facets of property valuation. Tom's expertise extends to high-value properties, waterfront locations, income-generating assets, and non-conforming properties. Tom has managed recruiting and education and has personally mentored 20-plus licensed and associate appraisers, all of whom are now certified and active. At his former company, he has spearheaded the creation of a teaching and training program for budding appraisers and championed a scholarship for the ADI program. He is currently a member for ADI and maintains regular engagement with Fannie Mae's ADI initiative. Please welcome Tom.
Thank you, Lutalo. Good evening, everybody. I'm going to share my screen, and we'll take you through. Everybody can see it?
Yes, sir.
Great. Please feel free to just interrupt with any questions as we go through. And I welcome, it's better to have interactive dialogue rather than having me just sit here and talk to you guys, because I always like to say I'll lose all of you in about 6.5 minutes, right? Especially at night if we just had dinner. So feel free to ask questions and we'll make it interactive, and we'll get a lot out of it. So I'll go ahead and get started with the reconsideration of value process. So to start, let's start off with, what is an appraisal, right? I think that a lot of times we overlook the basic stuff sometimes. And remember, an appraisal is just an opinion of value from a licensed or certified appraiser who holds a license in that state. Each state has their own licensing. There is no federal license for appraisal, as we know. So again, just an opinion of value. It provides for the lender how much the property is worth in the market, fair market value. Lenders require an appraisal to confirm the property as collateral for a loan, and we must follow USPAP, which is the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice. And these rules govern selection of comparables, acceptable methods, making adjustments along with standards for professionalism and ethics. And that is all in USPAP. So let's go to what is a reconsideration of value. A reconsideration of value, or ROV, as we will probably be speaking ROV most of the rest of the night as we get into this. It's a request made by a consumer for the appraiser to reevaluate the analysis and conclusions of the initial appraisal using additional information provided by the consumer that the consumer believes to be relevant to the appraisal's valuation or value determination. Typically, the consumer completes a ROV form, which includes information, data, and comparables. And we're going to take you through some of the changes that we have seen now with a lot, with everything that the folks at Fannie and Freddie and HUD have been doing some really, really good work. And we'll get into that right now. So Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, the GSEs, as they're referred to, and HUD recently announced a standardized approach for handling ROVs. And these changes are set to take place or have now taken place October 31st to 24. And for FHA case numbers assigned on or after the same date. So that is what has changed. And we'll get into what that looks like. So I'm going to just take you through a process. There's 2 slides for process, and I really wanted to simplify this to make it really simple to understand. I think many of you are familiar with reconsideration of value, and this will kind of take us through the updates, the changes, and things like that. So the first part is the lender disclosure. So during the loan application, they have to provide the borrower with a disclosure about their right to appeal an appraisal. That is at the loan application process. They'll also provide guidance to the borrower with instructions and guidance on initiating an ROV request. Then the second lender disclosure will happen when the appraisal is delivered to the borrower. So appraisal is completed, it's now sent, and any lenders on this call can chime in on the timeline of when they have to, send the appraisal to the consumer and all that. But that's when they get the second lender disclosure. Then the borrower requests an ROV. It must be submitted by the borrower prior to loan closing. The borrower completes the minimum requirements and sends the request for the ROV to their lender. At this point, the lender will review the request, verify the request has merit and contains all required information, gain clarity from the borrower if needed to clarify, and then let's go to the next slide. And then the lender requests the ROV from the appraiser. Sends a standardized communication to the appraiser detailing borrower's ROV request, the appraisal revision and confirmation. So the appraiser will analyze the new information and revise the appraisal if there's data in there that will change the opinion of value. Every lender will have slightly different, guidelines on how they like it. Some want it in the addendum page at the end, some want it in the front, some just want a revised report. So everybody's a little different with that, but they get to the same point. And so then the appraiser will send the revised report to the lender. And then the final lender steps, the lender communicates the results back to the borrower. If the material deficiencies were not corrected in the appraisal report, or if it contains suspected overt violations of any anti-discrimination laws, the lender will report the results to the licensing or regulatory agencies. In this case, the lender may obtain a second or subsequent appraisal report. It looks like we have a question. Do you want me to do questions, or is someone else gonna? I'm
Yeah,
happy to do it.
I'll do them, Tom.
Okay,
Yeah, I'll address them as they come and are
okay,
relevant to what you're speaking on.
sure. So, so the lender will, if there's deficiencies in the report, they can deem the report deficient or defective or not credible, right? And then they're allowed to order a new appraisal or a second appraisal. They can't just automatically do that. And again, I don't want to speak, exactly for the lenders. I know there's some bankers on this call as well, and they can chime in the chat exactly on that particular process. But I do know that they have to determine that the appraisal is, has material defects and is missing things for them to say, okay, we're going to order another one. One very important, I think something really, really important. After the loan is closed, an ROV request is no longer allowed to be submitted by the borrower. So it's very important to make sure that you let your clients know that this needs to be done in the process. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to appeal after the fact. So I'll pause there before we go to the next section, and we can maybe take some questions and anything on the process.
So I do have a question, Tom. Historically in practice, um, the challenge to the appraisal often comes from the seller side, as opposed to the buyer side. It's the seller or their agent that express trouble with an appraisal that comes less than the contract price. With this new process that's being recommended by the GSEs and of course the lenders after them, um, will sellers still have the opportunity to initiate an ROV or call for an ROV?
According to what I'm seeing from everything in the appraisal quality, and I've got all the links for this, and the borrower initiated ROV and the process that I'm seeing, I don't believe so. Everything relates to the borrower of for the ROV. It's a borrower initiated reconsideration of value. That's where it
Got
has to come from.
it. Got it.
Yes.
Um,
Now,
mhm,
I think they could maybe have input, right?
mhm.
But you know, it's always kind of troubled me sometimes, right? Where if you're on the buy side, right, and the listing agent is obviously not happy, right? But the buyer, I shouldn't say happy, but maybe they want to go with the appraised value, right? It always surprised me in the past that we would see that. So, but brokers work well together. So, again, you have maybe more uh, experience with that, and because you're in the middle of putting transactions together on the buy and the sell side. So, um, but yeah,
Yeah,
that's what we're seeing on the
yeah,
borrower.
yeah. Not to beat a dead horse. Typically, the buyers sit on the sideline because to a lot of them it's, oh well, maybe I can get this property for cheaper than what I thought I could get it for.
Hmm.
But I appreciate that. I want to address a couple questions that are in the Q&A, and then I will definitely go to you, Carmetta. How does this process impact undue influence policy? Is the first question.
So you still have to follow the appraisal independence requirement, right? Where you cannot you can't loan officers and people that are involved in the transaction cannot provide undue influence on the process. So air still rides in here in this process. They've done a pretty good job keeping people in loan production away from appraisers. I think that has gotten better over the years. Definitely better than it was 25 years ago when in my much earlier in my career when there was a lot more pressure. But there's still pressure, right? You're always feeling pressure, but that's our job is to do the right thing and give an unbiased opinion of value and do our job. And it's okay to disagree with our opinion. Um, But the pressure is always, I think pressure in any business is always there. But the appraisal independence requirement, if you're not familiar, by the way, with that document, you absolutely need to have that on your desktop, on your computer. You can Google it. It's AIR, Appraisal Independence Requirement. It talks about how appraisers and realtors interact, loan officers and appraisers, the process. It's a very simple read document. And I think it's really good to remind people sometimes that might not be familiar with it on how they're supposed to conduct themselves.
Yep, gotcha. So, second question, and this is kind of a rewind of what you talked about. Rosio asked, so sellers will not be able to appeal the appraisal.
No, no. The seller, uh, the seller will have to go to the buy side agent to get to the borrower to say, hey, here's some relevant data I think might have been missed, because they're not an intended user
Mhm.
of the appraisal, right? So they can't really, even though they get a copy of it, right? It does float. They get a copy usually.
Well,
Not
well,
always. They don't have to, right?
normally the sellers are not entitled to a copy and they don't get a copy of the appraisal.
Okay. But it
Yep.
seems like sometimes they do, right? The buy side may flip them a copy of it,
Yeah,
right?
if the buy side is requesting a price reduction, typically the seller side will then ask for an appraisal to prove that that price reduction is warranted or
Hmm.
there's merit to it, and then the buy side can decide to then give it over to the seller.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And look, I understand why you're asking the question and the importance of that, because as the listing broker, you have priced the property. If you're getting listings, I would say you're probably an expert in that market and you know the market really, really well. So, I would think that you'd want to be involved in the process, right? But you can, surely provide, you know, information and data if you feel that, but you can't really control how that goes. It has to be initiated from,
The buyer. Got it.
yep. Mhm.
I don't want to steal your thunder, and I don't know if this is what's next in the presentation. We do have a question I think may speak to something coming forward. It says, what information can a borrower provide to support the ROV in addition to comparable sales or listings?
Yeah, that's let's get into let's kind of roll on that, and let's get to that question, David. I will not forget to, and you said something else. Can the borrower have a professional realtor lawyer represent them? Yeah, we'll get to that too. So the last part was in the borrower initiated ROV, which is this is new. This is what they have to, all the borrower ROV requests must be in writing and must contain all of these pieces on your screen. And I have a sample ROV that I can show you guys as well. One thing that's really important, things that seem to be repeated over and over, was you cannot do an ROV after the loan has closed, and only one borrower initiated ROV request is permitted per appraisal, and it must be prior to closing. So it's very important that you get one go around. So make sure you do a thorough job on that. So here's a sample ROV. Again, the Fannie, Freddie, the GSEs, and HUD, they are not creating a form. They are giving guidance and to the lenders on what the process is and making sure that they have a process. But the forms will be slightly different, but they should pretty much look like this. And this will all be shared with you as well after the meeting. So, providing at least 2 additional comparables. You can provide up to 5. The close date must be no more than 12 months prior to the effective date. Proximity. There's some map tools that this particular one had. there's a few pieces in here about that. The next part is the appraisal information, contact information, and then the request reason for summary. So David, back to your question about borrower provide to support the ROV in addition to comparable sales listings. Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of relevant data that can have impact on the valuation of the property. And to have the borrower have a professional realtor, lawyer, not represent them, but they can assist them with the data, because like, right, a homeowner, borrower, buyer isn't going to have the MLS at their fingertips. So they are going to, this is where, good realtors shine, right? This is what you get paid for, to be an advocate for your client. And so, yes, you absolutely will be there. And what I always like to say is, in business or even personally sometimes, right? Your first draft of a email or a letter might be a little too hot, right? Might have a little too much heat on it. So it's always good to sleep on it or give it to a peer or a friend or somebody to say, hey, can you look at this? And usually the temperature will get lowered a little bit, because you don't want to come off, and maybe they deserve it. Maybe you're absolutely right, and you have every reason to be hot. But you always want to be professional and write really, really professionally.
Somebody
For
recently advised me that you can use AI to clean up your emails now. So you can write your hot email and ask AI to revise
Cool.
it with a professional, more cordial tone. So I've yet to try that, but I think I am going to try that.
Yeah, no, I had one the other day that it was way too hot, and I was probably over caffeinated, and my my thoughts were flowing well, but uh, I slept on it, and the next morning I rewrote it. So, but yes, absolutely, lawyers, realtors can assist. But you said represent. I believe the submission has to go from borrower, is what we're reading on everything, that all the correspondence we're getting. So just
Uh,
keep that in mind.
Tom, before you go forward, can you go back one slide so we can look at the kind of criteria again?
Sure.
All right. So two additional comparables, at least up to 5, and then no more than 12 months back. Now the proximity requirement. What happens in situations where there aren't comps that are like proximate to the home?
Well, no, and proximity. I mean, if you're in more of a rural area or an area where there's large acreage, right? You could be over a mile, mile and a half, and still be in the same neighborhood. So the proximity, um, is something that Fannie and Freddie have absolutely. And again, this is just a sample that I took from a lender.
Yep.
So every lender is gonna be a little bit different. Um, but the nice thing about, as I've evolved in my career and seen, it was always frustrating when the lender guidelines were, hey, you got to stay within a mile, you got to have the comps within 6 months, and all of this stuff. And when Fannie built their database, which again, if anybody on this call is not familiar with Fannie Mae's UAD, Uniform Appraisal Data Set database, it is the most robust real estate database on the globe. It has every piece of data in there, from all of the closed sale transactions, all the pendings, all the actives, and all of the appraisal data. So when we do an appraisal, it gets uploaded into Fannie Mae's system. So if there's a pending sale and it gets appraised, Fannie Mae knows about it. It's already in their database. So when they built their database, what they realized very quickly is that they had been suppressing appraisals. Appraisals were getting pushed in a downward direction because of If anybody remembers the 15 and 25, the 15% net and gross adjustments in 25, within a mile. This is why, sorry for the long explanation, and square footage adjustments. By crunching all the data, they realized, and they used like Honolulu, I remember at the time, as an example, like how, for a, the price per foot was so much higher that they were pushing the values lower with these guidelines. So that's really been refreshing, that they have opened that up. So, and to be honest, I think there's still a lot of people out there that don't really even realize. I still get questions when I do realtor education about the 15 and 25. And that's really, it's comparable properties. It's a method of substitution. That's really what it is. If the best comp could be 3 miles away, it's the best comp.
Yep, got it. So I've got a couple questions. They're all kind of tied together. And one is not in the Q&A, but I think it's necessary to address the next ones. So is a reconsideration of value, does that automatically mean a second appraisal is done? Or another appraiser or the appraiser has to go back to the property? Is that the case?
No, no.
Okay.
So a reconsideration of value is looking at the data that has been provided, comparable data, maybe some things that were missed in the appraisal, that some were pointed out that were inaccurate, description of the property, what have you. And then all of that information is taken into consideration. And if the opinion of value changes, then you would send back a revised report, and you would
Got it.
explain that I looked at the data. And then again, if the lender at that point feels it's deficient, right, that, hey, I think this appraiser was wrong here, this does seem relevant, and there's some other errors and things, then they could deem the appraisal deficient, and then they can move forward ordering a new appraisal from someone else.
So good question. And that actually is a segue to the next question. If a second appraisal is ordered, if the lender deems that to be necessary, who pays for that appraisal?
Definitely not the borrower, to my knowledge. I believe that the lender is taking care of that fee, but I don't want to speak for the lenders on that. But I'm pretty certain that, because at that point, right, it's the lender wants to make it right. Let's make it right. If something was done incorrect, or the opinion of value, or for whatever reason that licensed professional just isn't seeing it, then get it done correctly.
And
I
ultimately,
just
the lender is the entity that chose either that AMC or that appraiser to contact and order that appraisal, right?
Yes, that's correct. That's correct. So
Okay. The third question connected to that, that Leslie asked is, when will the listing agent, I think, know that there's an ROV request, or being requested? And I guess I can probably weigh in on that. I mean, that just depends on if the buyer, or their agent or their attorney informed them. I don't think there's anything mandatory on the books that says a buyer has to let the listing agent or the seller know. Would you agree with that, Tom?
I would, and I'm just looking at the FAQs that I printed here on Fannie Mae to see if there's anything that came up on that. I don't see anything in there about that. No.
Okay. And if there happens to be a second appraisal, which I think this is kind of directly answered anyway, does the listing agent or the seller, do they need to be made aware that there's a second appraisal that is being done?
I would think that they would have to be, right? Because the listing agent is going to give them access to the property.
Correct.
So
Yep.
I would think there'd have to be communication. Yes,
Okay.
for that.
And I think we can address this. When an ROV is requested, does it mean the same appraiser will be assigned, or does it go to another appraiser? And I know you kind of indirectly answered this already.
Yeah, just remember an ROV is a reconsideration of the original appraisal. That's what that is. So it's not automatically new appraisal, right? What they're trying to do, well, and they've done it before. I mean, this has been in place. Reconsideration of value has been in place for a long time, but they're really holding the lender a little more accountable, right? Because they're the process was a little vague. So they're giving the appraiser the opportunity, if they make mistakes happen. I'm human. I make mistakes. I do, and you have to own it. Say, you know what, you're right. I made a mistake. Let me correct it. I'm very sorry for any heartburn it has caused. And if it changes the opinion of value, absolutely, let's get it right. So I think it's fair to give the appraiser, as a professional, licensed professional, the opportunity to correct any errors or be open to looking at something that may have been missed. And that's what that's what the process is in place for.
Sounds good. All right, Tom, I'm gonna give it back to you. Um, and stop asking all the questions. Thank
Okay. All right. So I don't have a lot left, but we'll roll through. And those were great questions. Thanks for. So this is where we talk about realtor assistance. Um, as realtors, you are advising your clients on on what needs to be done and how it should be done. So you're helping them, pointing out factual errors. I always like to say, do not perform an appraisal review. Don't go through and say comp one is terrible because of this. Comp two was terrible because of that. Now, there could be a few comps that you could say, hey, that is not really the same neighborhood, that comparable. It shouldn't be in the report. And here's another one that's better. But you don't want to just go through line by line reviewing. Point out the factual errors. That's the most important part. Anything that is factual that is incorrect, not opinion based. And then you're going to provide additional and relevant data for the subject property itself, right? The neighborhood and competing neighborhoods.
Let me
And
let me ask you this, Tom, on the way in here. I'm sorry,
please.
I'll let you finish your sentence.
Oh, that was it. Go ahead.
Would you advise, and we talked about this in our first episode on preparing for an appraisal, would you advise that the realtor or the realtist that's working with that client um, provide this information to the appraiser after the fact, after the appraisal is done? Or would you recommend that they do it leading to the appraisal?
I highly recommend that you do it prior to the appraisal. I also highly recommend that this is good preparation. This is the next slide. If you look at the very last one on the right side, email prior to meeting the appraiser. It's critical that you send the data and information about the house in a very neat and organized fashion. Email it to the appraiser. In the world of speed, right? Everything is fast. As we're sitting here on this call, we can order dog food or right a sandwich, and it's going to be on our front porch or at our door, right? When we get off this meeting, this is the world that we live in of speed. But I always say speed kills, right? And it can be dangerous. The environment has been created by a lot of the large appraisal management companies and requirements that they have to turn these appraisals in sometimes 24 hours after they've been to the property. With that, because of that, it creates a speed issue where they've got to get them done quickly. So I always want to say, when the appraiser meets at the house, many times the appraisal is already completed. They've already kind of pre-written it. Not saying that's right, but that is the world we live in today with a lot of the appraisals that are being done. So I would highly recommend to get the data once they've made contact to set the appointment. get an email and send out, looking forward to meeting you on Thursday at the appraisal. I'm providing some relevant data of the subject property and the area, neighborhood, comparables, whatever, and put that all in a nice formatted email and send that to the appraiser, because now you've engaged them. And if you notice, I put floor plan and plot of survey as 1 and 2, because that could be a time savings for an appraiser. If you have a floor plan from an old appraisal, it's already been measured. Still have to verify the measurements, but it's nice to go off of a prior floor plan than have to draw it from scratch, right? It's a lot easier to do that. Plot of survey is really, really helpful. So those two things are time savings, and then all of the other information in here. And again, we're going to share this with all of you. So I would use this 2 ways. If you are, if you're a listing agent, you are right. They call for the appointment. You're making sure that you're sending this prior. If you are on the, you're advising your client who's doing a refinance on their home, then they call you and say, hey, I'm really concerned about the appraisal. I just want to make sure the appraiser has the right information, right? It's a very similar, obviously you're not going to, there's no contract. There's some contract information in here, things like that, multiple offers. That wouldn't apply, but everything else would. List of improvements, just a good list of improvements, right? That has all the improvements, the dates that they did them, and the cost, how much they spent, I think is good too. So,
Now, ironically, a good listing agent for the listing agents that are on a call would gather this information while they're actually putting the listing together. Even prior to getting the listing, they will be getting this information so that they can recommend the proper, I guess, listing price to their client. So
that's right.
if you've done this due diligence in the beginning, it's really just sharing the information that you already have. Tom, I know you have a kind of a sample appraisal packet. Illinois Realtors a couple years together put together a sample appraisal packet as well that basically gives the same kind of tips and information on what to include to go to an appraiser.
Yeah, it's really good. You know, I've been doing this for a little while, so um, I miss the days of, you know, just I learned so much from really good brokers. Um, just that's how I gained competency. That's how I learned. Uh, Picking up the telephone and asking questions about, the comps and the neighborhood and the area, and just learning. I really miss that. And we don't have it as much today. There was a realtor, and he would give this packet, with the folder and everything, stapled and paper clipped, and it was, it made your appraisal so much easier because it was so well put together. And we've gotten away from that, but we've got to, just take that and digitize it. I always say, as you build packages, if you're in an office, grab a couple of your peers and work together and collaborate on building these neighborhood data and information. So much of that gets missed,
Yeah,
right? If there is an economic indicator, because all of you guys on the call, you guys are involved in your community. You attend the meetings, what's going on. That a vacant building is going to be rehabbed, and they're going to put these condos in there, or apartment building, or right, a new grocery store is coming in, or all these things are very good economic indicators. Talking about all that stuff, all the relevant information about the area, the neighborhood, the historic significance of a neighborhood, possibly, and then all the data and all the off market stuff too. There's a lot of things that happen off market that can be relevant. So you guys are the true experts. You are. You're experts at putting deals together and doing transactions. Appraisers are not. We don't have um, great managers and managing brokers that have meetings and have education and teach us. I've said it for years and years. I wish the appraisers had a similar format with a managing broker style, because it would create a more mentorship, and it would create, just a good monthly meeting, right, to get together and talk about best practices and help each other. A lot of appraisers work solo. Not that that's a bad thing. A lot of, I mean, there's plenty of great appraisers out there, but I just think it's healthy for have dialogue as humans to be together and collaborate. I think it's really important.
Yeah, Tom, I appreciate you bringing that up in our committee meetings because I never thought about that way, and I absolutely agree. I think that on the broker side is important for us to collaborate as well. I got a couple of questions I want to kind of cycle through. Well, before that, Paulette, thank you. Scope of work absolutely should be included in the sample packet, so thank you for that. Rory Boone asked, "What is Fannie and Freddie's definition of proximate? Traditional has been a 1 mile radius and so the last 6 months." He said, "I heard you mention it has changed. Is there a place that this can be found that someone can be directed to, so they have the new definition?"
So those are lender guidelines um, that would be set by the lender in their ROV. So there isn't like the Fannie and Freddie, they're not putting out a standardized ROV. I'm just looking at the FAQ just to make sure here. One second. I want to make sure I get this right for you guys. Data ROVs, description, any data. It doesn't say in the that's actually was here. It was there. So that is the ROV request, right, of what it contains. It doesn't say anything about, a mile away, 6 months. And let's talk about that for a second, because I get this question 100% of the time when I do realtor education. Those are lender guidelines. That is not a rule. That is not a law. That is not an absolute when you appraise. That is a guideline that a lender would like you to abide by. If you are a skilled appraiser, you can explain away the guideline. If every comp has to be a mile away, because those are your best comps, right? Maybe I'm in a rural area. There's no way I'm staying within a mile. I might have to go 15 miles for a comparable. That's normal. That's a guideline I will explain away. Mr. or Mrs. Lender or whoever it is, I cannot meet your guideline of a mile, and here's why. I cannot stay within 6 months. The last comp to sell was 2.5 years ago. Here's the comp. Those are guidelines. And so I'm glad you asked the question, because it's really, really important that we always remember that guidelines are guidelines. They are not something that you absolutely, our job is to give an unbiased opinion of value, not say, oh, well, I got to do the guideline. But just when you have an out of the box property that's not cookie cutter, you're not going to be able to meet those guidelines. You just won't.
Thank you, Tom. So I think we can probably move forward. I think the rest of the questions I'm responding to are not directly related to. Oh, do you know in the Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac system, Rory, if you can retype that, I would appreciate that just for more clarity. What are the typical comps for square footage plus or minus? That's a question for you, Tom.
So, you mean for comparables as far as the range, like 100 square feet bigger or 200 square feet bigger?
Yeah, I'm assuming that's what he was saying.
So, you want to try to stay within, I'd say, well, it depends, if it's 1,000 square feet, right? Of, maybe 200 square feet. So probably within 20%, 30%. But there are, again, exceptions on that, right? If you've got something that has kind of excess square footage, like large hallways and foyers and things, but the room counts the same, Uh, or they just have a really giant family room that's bigger than necessary and it still will compete. Again, competition, right? Open competition. Um, so but you want to try to stay within, I would say probably 20% on the square footage would be fair on that. But sometimes you can't. So you got to work with what you have.
Thank you. Okay. Um, I think that we can move forward, Tom.
Okay, yeah. And I saw one question about, the GSEs and HUD and the intent. You know, the the reason that they have done this, and this is really good, I've had to study and really work to get really familiar with all these new process and procedures and everything they're doing. The borrower needs to be heard, and I think as they peeled back the layers and looked at all of what was going on, right? I think they realized that, hey, these homeowners weren't being heard. They didn't, they disagreed with the opinion of value, but they sent an email or they did something and maybe nobody got back to them, or they just weren't being heard. So this now requires, right, and puts layers in there and guidelines to say, hey, you can't just not respond to somebody if they have a concern about their value of their home. This has to be addressed, and you have to give them the opportunity to fill out the ROV form and go through the process to appeal the appraisal. So I like what I'm seeing, um, and I think it's about time, to be quite honest, right?
Right.
Yeah, it could be more work for the appraisers from time to time, but you know what? Wouldn't you rather just explain yourself and what you did, or maybe you did make a mistake and you get a chance to correct it? um, I think it's fine. I think we will have a much better process as we move forward. I believe that.
Ironically, so I sit on the appraisal committee for the National Association of Realtors, and in our last meeting, that exact thing was talked about amongst the appraisers, and they were saying how this process may actually help appraisers because some of the unnecessary appeals will get weeded out from the beginning, and they'll spend less time responding to things that probably shouldn't have been appeals in the first place, and allow them time to focus on the situation where they might have made an error or overlooked something.
Definitely.
Yep. Okay.
And then I think my last slide was just resources. There's a lot here. I would say, I think the best resources that I've been really looking at is Fannie Mae. So it's the borrower initiated ROV, reconsideration of value, FAQs, that was done on May 1st, updated on September 26th, 2024. And then inside there, they reference the appraisal quality matters inside there. It's B4 1.3-12. And I really like that document a lot. The appraisal quality matters. I got it. I've got it here. Sorry. Um, but this is really, really good. There's a lot of really good information in here about the process and what the lenders and the requirements and how it will flow. And I summarized a lot of this tonight just for simplicity, because I didn't want it to be too wordy, so we can just kind of start with the basics as this goes through. One thing I want to say too to you know the brokers, realtors, you guys have a really, really strong, unified lobby, and you guys are a force. And so you have, there are times where things need to be talked about and changes could be made. So don't think that you're not being heard, and you should absolutely be going to your managing broker or going to CAR, right, and bringing these things up to to improve the process. So as we go through, if you see something that, could be improved, I think it's important that you guys speak up on that, and we'll continue to refine the process as this goes forward. But I think it's going to go well.
Yep. Tom, I got a few more questions for you, and then we
Please.
wind this down. So, Rory, thank you for revising, Rory. Rory says, do you know if Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac systems store comparables in the recent appraisals are covered under the Freedom of Information Act for ROV? Like, can people get access to them?
Wow, Rory, that's great. I like the way you're thinking. Um, I don't think so. I don't believe that they can. You know, it's think about think about this for a second as an appraiser. It's our data that we send to a lender that gets uploaded into the UCDP portal, and they use that data to create a appraisal waiver, and the appraisal doesn't get ordered because they have data on the property. So as appraisers, we were very upset about all of that as it happened. And I will say, there's a lot of data in there, and if that gets in, you know, other people's hands, that might not be great, right? But I think your question is right. You know, I'm curious to know. I don't think you can, but you could try, right? It would be nice. When it happened, when UAD happened, the appraisers all got together and said, why can't we see the data prior to us submitting the appraisal? Why are you scrubbing our appraisal and scoring it and then telling us what's wrong with it? And there was a lot of discussion around that. And when it was explained to me, I did realize that, you know what, they want our human brain to give the opinion of value, and then get it submitted into the system, and then come back for maybe questions or inconsistencies based on the data and based on what your peers have submitted as well. And I think it's gone pretty well, honestly. But it's a great question. There's a lot of data in there.
Thank you. All right. Desi said, and I'm assuming that I'm interpreting this correctly. Desi would like you to speak on the impact or the importance of submitting evidence of multiple offers and how that might, and she's questioning how that might reflect on the opinion of value.
Great question. Thank you, Desi. And I'm glad you asked it, because multiple offers are really important, because you're painting a picture of the demand for the subject property at the time of sale of contract. You can never go back and create or recreate, I should say, the demand at the time of sale. You can't go back and do it, right? Try to go back in the MLS system 2 years ago and figure out what the demand was like at that time. It's really hard to do. So as appraisers, we like to know the multiple offers and know what they are. And we understand that sometimes the buyer doesn't necessarily take the highest, they take the best that fits, right? When they're moving, all of these factors that they may consider: financing, cash, not cash, all of that. So what it does for us as appraisers, it helps us as we have a range of value. And if the market is moving in an upward direction and we're trending upward, and we can show that trend line, we are coming in at the upper end of the range of our reconciliation when we reconcile the value, because we are showing that it's a moving market in an upward direction. We have been supplied with all of these offers. Look, there were 12 offers on the property. The market is trending in upward direction. We have low supply, high demand, and we are coming in at the very, very upper end of the range of value in our final reconciliation of value because of these factors. So that's why for us, an astute appraiser um, is appreciating that data and should be asking for it.
Tom, the last two questions, and actually the last few questions are not directly related to the topic. But since we're at the end of this session and we have almost an hour of time, I'm going to ask these questions. One person said, can you discuss the GSEs and HUD's intent or relationship for this to unconscious bias? I don't know if you want to tackle that or you want to pass. It doesn't.
No, we can get into that. Again, like as I spoke before, it's including people in the process, letting them feel that they're part of the process and they can be heard. Um, you know, I've had to take, classes on unconscious bias, and you know, it's really important. Um, you know, when I became an appraiser, um, a whole world opened up for me. I grew up on the north side. Um, and my parents grew up at Irving, Lincoln, and Damon. They met at the dime store on Lincoln Avenue. My mom originally was on the west side, and their house was bulldozed when they built 290, and they moved to the north side. So I learned a lot about the city. But when I became an appraiser, I started appraising in neighborhoods that I had never ever been in. I was everywhere, and I a whole world opened up for me of, you know, all the just so many incredible areas, neighborhoods, history, and I love it. Right, so um, I don't understand um, people that would intentionally do anything like that. But for me, it's all about data and information. I think when Latalo and I got to know each other, as we talked through a lot of the issues and stuff, competency is at the core, I think, of most of what we see, or if not all. I think just people, there's a lot of incompetency out there, and people get themselves in trouble because they just don't really know the market or take the time to really get to know the market and ask the true professionals that are transacting in the market. So I really believe that it's important that always give people a fair shake, but make sure that that they're competent. If they don't know the area and they don't have the competency, it's probably not going to be a great outcome.
You just answered the next question. So the next question was, does it help if appraisers are familiar with the city or the neighborhood where the property is? And of course, geographic competency is critical for an appraiser doing their job. Um, where can someone find a list of reputable appraisers if there is such a place?
Well, asc.gov, right, is I think the largest database that's out there. Um, yeah,
ASC.gov.
asc.gov.
Okay.
That's where they've got all the appraisers that have to be on ASC to get work from any of the GSEs. And then as far as lists go, obviously, the realtors are really the best at knowing who the experts in the market are. That's why I get so many referrals, because I work very closely with the brokers. Um, but again, I competency in USPAP, there is only competency. There isn't geographic competency. Geographic has been put in um, because it is important to have somebody who's an expert. Now, for me personally, I live in Glenview. I'm an expert in any city neighborhood. You could put me in any city neighborhood, and I know them all. I'm an expert in every single one. I have incredible competency to appraise in the city of Chicago, because I lived in the city and I appraised in the city for over a decade, and I know it extremely well. So I'm competent, even though I don't live there. So it's important when you, just because somebody has an 815 phone number or a 312 or someone you think is out of your area, don't judge them. Get to know them, ask the questions, and make sure that they're competent to appraise in that area. And I think you can usually quickly figure that out. Because it's human nature, right, Latalo? Nobody's going to put their hand up and say, I'm incompetent. Please help me, right? But as realtors, you guys are helping appraisers gain competency by giving them those packages and all that information.
Thank you, Tom. Um, at this time, I do want to again thank the CEO of the Chicago Urban League, Karen, for making this possible and all of our partner organizations tonight. Unfortunately, Karen is below the weather tonight, so she can't address you directly. But I do want to welcome the Chief Operating Officer of the Chicago Urban League with some final words. Carmela Coleman.
Thank you so much, Lutalo. I don't know if you're able to turn on my camera. I cannot, as host, if you can do that, but I will just go right ahead. Again, as Lutalo said, my name is Calmetta Coleman. I'm Chief Operating Officer of the Chicago Urban League. On behalf of our CEO, Karen Freeman Wilson, I really want to say thank you to Tom for all the great information that you've shared this evening, and to Lutalo McGee for helping lead this work for us. The Chicago Urban League has really, over the past several months, actually it's been a full year now, really looking into the issue around appraisals, because we know that home ownership is a key path to wealth building, and the work that we do in terms of trying to really help drive racial and economic equity for Black families and communities. Home ownership is a primary way that we do that. We also understand that while a home might be the biggest purchase that most people will make in their lifetimes, there is some mystery around how the values of homes are arrived at for many of us. And so as we understood that there are many questions that people have about appraisals, particularly as it comes to people's ability to tap into the value of their homes and draw on that wealth, and how that varies, based on what neighborhood you live in, that we really wanted to take the opportunity to educate people about various aspects of the appraisal process. This is the third in a series that aims to do that. And so again, real huge shout out to Latalo McGee for leading us in this effort, and for the other speakers who have provided information on that, for the brokers and realtors and others who have joined this conversation to educate themselves, as well as to educate those people who might be your clients, your customers. So just really encourage. I know Lutalo is going to share some additional information via email with attendees. Encourage you to spread that along to other people, as we can make sure that people really have a better understanding of the appraisal process overall, as well as some of the changes that are coming down the pipe. And then finally, I want to recognize Pam Stalling, who is our Vice President of Housing and Financial Empowerment, who leads that work for us, and the work that we do every day in trying to help particularly more Black people become homeowners, and to start to have that base to build wealth on. So again, thank you all for participating tonight. We look forward to continuing to engage with you, and really want to hear what other questions you might have about information that we can provide to be helpful in this process. So I'll turn it back over to Lutalo.
Thank you, Carmetta. And again, thank you, Tom, for providing information that you did tonight, tips, the advice to our attendees. And again, thank you to our committee for lending their time, energy, and nuggets of wisdom to this work this year. We do not expect anyone to sat through one, two, or all of the episodes to be appraisers, but we do hope that the information provided helps you understand how to prepare for an appraisal, how to read an appraisal report, and how to contest an appraisal you reason was not done correctly or appropriately. Whether you're a consumer or a professional here to gain greater insight on the appraisal process. This is a powerful step you took, and we greatly appreciate your attendance. We will be sending out a follow-up email with the links to our past episodes, the links that Tom was sharing, and as well as his slideshow. If you have questions once you receive that email, please feel free to apply, and we will try to get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you and have a good evening.
Good night, everyone.